Um, so I feel like with this topic, you could have made a ecological documentary, something very advocacy oriented, telling us, kind of what to think. But you chose something almost hypnotic, artful, telling us, what, showing us what to see. Is that the approach that you took?
Vaguely, I think. But hello, firstly, thank you for being here, and it's very nice. I've barely spent any time in LA, so it's very, very nice to be here. I think that was sort of vaguely the wheelhouse of things when we began. I think I was initially sure of what it was not going to be. So when we started, I was certain that it must not be like a regular conventional nature doc or a wildlife doc. We had no experience in it, nor did I have the ambition in it. I was also sure that uh, I wasn't interested in making a kind of frontally political film, nor did I want to make a film just about the brothers' relationship. And most of all, I did not want to make a sweet film about nice people doing good things. So when you have these different boxes where which you definitely don't want to take, and I had a vague sense of wanting to do something which was, when you meet the brothers, um, you realize that the film obviously can't be restless or anxious, because they have this kind of a meditative, contemplative quality to, and they're like philosophers of the urban. So it of course had to be lyrical and poetic. So that slowly kind of evolved its own grammar, and it had to be slow and fluid.
So how did you come across them?
Uh, I think the film first took shape before I met them. I was vaguely sort of sure of a texture that I wanted to work with. If you live in Delhi, especially in the recent years, the air itself is a very heavy, opaque, palpable, visceral kind of a entity, and your life is laminated by this pervasive grayness. And I wanted to make something on this texture of that kind of air. And so I had a vague kind of a abstract triangulation of air, bird, humans. That was the sort of vague diagram I was working with. And I think if I had to pinpoint one moment, there was this one time when I was sat in a car in a traffic jam, and I was just idly looking up from the car, and the sky is usually this kind of monochromatic, hazy gray, and the kites are these tiny black dots that are usually gliding, and I had a distinct impression as if one of the dots was beginning to fall, and I was really gripped by this idea of a bird that falls off this gray, polluted sky. And then I literally Googled where do birds that fall go to. And that's when the remarkable work of the brothers came up. And the minute you visit them just once, it's a singularly cinematic space, that basement where you have this dark industrial, this grubby, heavy metal cutting machines. And alongside that, you have these magisterial birds. So the sheer salient bipolarity of that space is inherently very cinematic. So I think that's how the film began.
So when you went to them and said, like, I want to film you, were they into the idea? Did they have reservations? Did they say, like, okay, but with these terms? I mean, what did they?
Yeah, I mean that's how it also ought to be. That's how it always is. Also, so they were very media savvy people in the sense that they were interviewed before, but they were very used to the sit down talking head interview kind of format. So I think what took us time was to try and communicate to them that we were our main ambition was to get a sense of their quotidian, banal, mundane everydayness. Where people are being instead of behaving in front of the camera. And anyway, it's the first shoot, almost months of shooting. Very often is useless, right? It's the other thing is the main thing that works is actually boredom, because when people get really bored of you and the camera is not an obtrusive presence anymore, and when you get the first yawn on camera is when the your real uncurated self sort of rushes out.
It's really interesting because now that I think about it, I think probably initially when you watch this movie, you know they're great because they look somewhat bored. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And boredom is often, firstly, boredom on camera often bespeaks expertise. It, it has certain, aesthetically, it has certain qualities. But more than that, boredom is one of the main things in the toolkit of the verite filmmaker, because you're waiting for the point when, the body language changes, the timbre of voice changes, and the first few days people are still a bit, but soon after, say, the 14th day or the 15th day, you see that the hair's not combed, they're a bit, it's like there's a easier quality, and they're either yawning in front of the camera, or they're swearing more easily in front of the camera. It's like there's a kind of ease that comes through, and that's when the real material. Before that, almost all of it is entirely not useful. The only thing that we used from the preliminary screening for us was, that bit where Salik's glasses get taken away. So that was, and that I was shooting actually. So that sort of a thing where it just so happened that the framing was okay and the aperture was correct, and and so it was a completely fortuitous sort of a thing. But apart from that, everything came in after many months of shooting. All of the stuff that we did before that was not useful.
It's like you're waiting them out. It's almost like it's a waiting game until the real stuff happens. You in mentioning the shot, the where the glasses are taken off, it does kind of make me think of a more gruesome question, but I think it might be also an art question too. Is you don't show a bird falling out of the sky. Did you have that on camera?
No, not for the lack of not trying though. I mean, that's getting the glasses going, or the chipmunk out of the pocket, etc., or the reflection of the plane on the puddle. All of those are already things that, when you're praying to the gods of accident on camera, that those are already the things that have been very fortunately given unto you, right? So, but that's very difficult to get. Also, because you see, like, it's not like a straight plummet. It's like sometimes they'll sit on trees and they can't fly, and sometimes, so it's not like one neat shot. So, I mean, that was always our sense of, but that's almost impossible to get.
Like the day before I was going to see this movie, a bird fell out of the sky right in front of me on a tennis court. So that was I feel like it was like cosmically,
Destined.
yeah. Um, the talk to me about how you and your cinematographer worked, because I mean there are shots in this that are just some of the most extraordinary I've seen in a documentary. I mean you open. I mean you have this these shots that speak to the coexistence that you're going after, a turtle on a trash heap, these rack focus, moments where you're seeing, a spider, and behind that it's fire, and you're kind of showing us what are you going to look at. You're telling us, what you're asking us what we're going to look at. Can you talk about how you worked with your cinematographer to
Right.
get those?
So there are two cinematographers. There's this German DP called Ben Bernhard, and this Indian DP called Riju Das. Um, Initially, when we started, remember, they only came in after a year of the debris of dead footage that I was shooting, and uh, when we started initially, I thought that I'd do handheld and, like classic verite, and the classic style of this is character, this is the camera. Character moves, and the camera's movement is motivated by the character's movement, right? That's the usual principle. But it became clear to me that this film couldn't feel restless in its form or anxious in its form, because the idea was that the audience had to be able to have a kind of a zoomed out meditative reaction, and to not get lost in the particularity of the brother's house, to be able to sort of think about simultaneity and entanglement of life, and kinship or neighborliness between humans and non-humans. So that was important. So there had to be a kind of slow fluidity. Now the main thing that we discussed with the DPs is, how do we give a kind of grammar to a kind of simultaneity of life. Now, there are only any kind of simultaneity can only be shown in two or three ways with the camera, right? You can either do tada, or you can do tada, or you can do. Like there are only certain ways in which you can reveal things. And so we realize that firstly, every time we show the animals, and of course there's like rats, snails, pigs, horses, lizards, a whole panoply of animals in the film. Every time we show an animal, it'll be an uncut shot, and it'll be a shot where there'll be two elements in the, so there'll either be in the backdrop something of the city and something of the animal. So like a turtle clambering through trash, but there's traffic going past. Or you see a earthworm like a centipede coming out of a puddle of water, but then you see a plane's reflection on the, so basically two different elements that sort of get stitched together. But most importantly, to have an experience of time.
Did it grow out of those early, when you mentioned just sitting in the city and looking up and seeing a kite on a smokestack? Did those shots come out of how you first saw the city like that area?
Yeah, we also decided that we'd not use any tele shots. Like it won't look like a regular wildlife doc where we zoom in into the eye of the flying bird. It had to look like how it looked to the naked eye, and that means a certain slowness, right? If my eye is following a kite a bird in the sky, bird watching or ornithology is essentially a slow process. It's a kind of deceleration, right? Where you subtract yourself and you're just waiting and watching, or you're looking at a thicket of branches and you're waiting for something to fly off, right? That in itself entails a certain kind of slowing down. And over time, I think the language that developed of the film was that kind of a cadence. So, kind of with any kind of animal shooting, you have to be slow. It can't be a quick run and gun sort of a thing. So, over time, that, and it also, I kept vaguely muttering the word poetic, poetic, poetic constantly. So, over time, that became the register of trying to access a kind of lyrical form. But also, this film also had to invoke the black kite as this wondrous, otherworldly magical thing, because that's how the brothers looked at the bird when they were kids. So we had to invoke that kind of aura, right? So all of this necessitated a kind of vocabulary, which I think, and we shot for 3 years. So
3 years. Wow. That shot of you're right. I'm thinking of that shot of all the birds in the cage, where you see how different they all are, the different kinds. I mean, and they're majestic, and they're waiting, and it's like they're just ready to get back out there.
because they're raptors, they're not cute songbirds. So the thing is that there's a kind of ferocity to a raptor, which is really, it inspires a whole variety of emotions, right? It's not like you're partly scared, you're partly in awe of the glowing eyes, and you're also feeling a sense of empathy because they're desperately injured because of things that our cities have done. So it's a complicated kind of feeling, but they're also very handsome birds to shoot portraits of. So visually, they're very interesting.
We talk about Salik, who is maybe my favorite comic sidekick of any documentary I've ever seen. He's an incredible. He's incredible. I mean, he brings out the humor in the brothers, and he's kind of us because he's asking questions that we maybe want to ask but are afraid to. Can you talk about Salik as a person in this movie?
Yeah, I think Salik saved the film for us, because the thing is that the brothers are incredible and they do remarkable work, but they're very private people. They're very um, introverted, and very often they can't flash a smile, right? They're very serious, stoic people, which is interesting about them. But Salik gives a kind of counterpoint because he has this unvarnished innocence, right? And there's a kind of ready, every character, like every now and then you meet people who have this kind of effervescence where there's a readiness to smile, and that creates a kind of connection with like the audience always roots for Salik. And it's amazing the laughs he gets, like in any theater. He'll say something like, if there's a nuclear war, what will happen to the birds? Or if we go and lie down in the cage, will they, he'll say something like this, and it inevitably, because there's a kind of unvarnished innocence about him, and he's very unself-conscious, so you're constantly rooting for him. So for instance, that key moment in the film where he's looking at a video of violence, and then and you can hear the audio violence, and he puts the phone away, and the chipmunk comes out of his pocket. It's because he's seeking for, because that's where he seeks kind of a sense of safety from, and you really root for him. So in a way, everything that even its conflicts can be lightly held and can be kept at an oblique angle because you're already so empathetic towards him.
What's been the reaction to this film in India?
So well, after Sundance, I was surprised to see that there wasn't a very big reaction, but after Cannes, there was a really big, because I think Cannes also has a kind of, it has a kind of cultural space in the country where there was a lot of press coverage. There's been a lot of media coverage of the brothers and the issue with the birds and all of that. We've done a bunch of private screenings and done a lot of screenings in festivals inside the country. We're still trying to figure out um, a theatrical release, but for that we'll have to figure out the censor certificate and all of that. So once I get back now, I'll have to figure that out. But the film will be on HBO, so it'll be available everywhere. There's generally been a lot of curiosity and a lot of conversation with different bird watching groups and a lot of cinema clubs and film festivals, etc. But I'd love to put it on the theaters there. But I mean, there are many complications to that that one has to figure out.
You mentioned Unrest in this movie, and you don't mention politicians by name or political parties, and I'm kind of wondering, is that partly out of safety reasons for the brothers, or?
Partly, but see, this is the thing. So it'll not be entirely true if I said that this is only because of questions of sensitivity. The thing is that when we started the film, we thought it was a purely ecological film and not a frontally conventionally political film. But then what happened is that the city of Delhi just was constantly on the boil. It was a year of a lot of tumult and turbulence, and over time we couldn't just eschew everything that's happening, right? So but the brothers themselves are not very interested in that part of the, like that realm of experience. They're knowledgeable, but they're not, they're interested, like they would say that they're interested in the politics between humans and birds. That's also political. But the thing is that I had to find a way to, like, either I completely neglect it or I let it sort of enter. And I realized that the form had to be a kind of leak, like the outside world kind of leaks in or resonates in. So a character goes to the balcony and you hear the murmurs of a protesting crowd, or a character's in an auto rickshaw and you sense that there's some trouble. So it's a kind of, it forms a kind of epistemic wallpaper of their lives, and it's constantly in the background. And sometimes the outside world sort of hemorrhages in, but it also shows that the brothers soldier on with their bird work despite everything. But having said that, I feel like in hindsight, I think I prefer it in this kind of a oblique tangential form, because you sense the political more than being told that this is what the film stands, this is what the issue is. Because inevitably what happens is that if it feels like it's pedantic or it's lecturing, then you end up either preaching to the choir or you're not having a dialogue at all with people who you don't share a belief system with. But the idea is that a film has to be a Trojan horse, right? You have to emotionally move people and have a conversation. So I think in hindsight, I prefer this kind of a oblique form.
Yeah, and then you start and you look at Nadim sitting on his porch, and you think this is no different than a hawk sitting on a perch, like protecting its nest.
So that sort of a thing where there's a direct metaphorical um, resonance between the birds and is not something that had, like, that's something that over time on the edit we thought that okay, maybe that's happening, because they're also, I don't want to show them as there are risks to that metaphor. So I don't want to be heavy handed with that at all, and I definitely wasn't thinking of it while shooting. But I understand because people have brought it up. So uh, I think there are hints or nudges at it, but that's not, definitely, that is something very intentional.